A woman has been found dead inside a tent in Vancouver's downtown east side. Firefighters made the disturbing discovery after they put out a fire at a tent encampment yesterday afternoon. Police think the woman likely died before the fire broke out, but the cause of her death still remains unknown. Now, last July, Vancouver Fire Chief issued an order for the city to remove all tents and structures, this due to safety concerns. Mi-Jung Lee joins me now, anchor of CTV News at 6 in Vancouver. Mi-Jung, great to see you. This is a story, I mean, heartbreaking, first of all, that of course they've had to find, this woman dying here. But this is something that it's been a conversation. People feared something that like this could happen. What's the latest that you can tell us in terms of the investigation? As we know, tents have been ordered to have been taken down back in July.
That's right. And now we're at March. There are still about 74 tents there along Hastings Street. It's the downtown east side, a troubled neighborhood in our city. But that number sounds high. But imagine last summer, it was August, at the height of this tent city, there were actually 180 tents there. And at the time, it was causing a lot of concern in the city, safety mainly. The fire chief at the time said, this is a huge fire hazard. Last year, in 2022, they were dealing with hundreds of fires in the downtown east side, a lot of them connected to these tents. And so now this weekend, we've had 3 fires in as many days. There was Saturday night, Sunday night, and then we just learned that there was another one early this morning. It was last night, the Sunday night fire, where they put out the fire in the tent. It was caused by a heating device, and then they did find the body of this woman inside the tent. But investigators say they do believe that she died. Her death is not connected to the fire, that she most likely had died prior to that. But these fires are just raising the concern about how much of a danger this is. The fire chief wanted the whole tent city dismantled because she was worried that a huge fire could rip through the entire encampment. So that was 180 tents last year. This time right now we're at about 74. So there are still dozens and dozens of people living in these tents. And a lot of them say they would rather live in a tent, despite the cold, despite the rain, despite the snow we've had. They'd rather live in a tent in the downtown east side than live in some of the decrepit single room occupancy housing that they can afford. That's the only kind of housing they could afford that isn't a tent. But those conditions are really, really terrible. There's a lot of infestation. They're not clean. And a lot of the people are saying they would rather live in a tent.
Wow.
And that there isn't suitable housing for them.
Yeah, and I know housing, of course, becomes that much larger issue in terms of when we're saying, how do we solve this? It's gotten so bad, I understand, Mi-Jung, that people are also now, as you mentioned, these tents are set up on the street, but people are also setting up tents in the parks too now.
That's right. For the past few years, there have been different parks in around near the downtown east side where people have set up tents just because of the lack of housing. And we have one that's called Crab Park on the Vancouver waterfront, just a few blocks from the downtown east side. There are a few dozen tents set up there. They've been there for about 2 years. Now, the park board, it is a public park. The park board was trying to evict the people living in the tents there. They tried to evict them last year, but it went to court. And some of the residents fought this challenge. They fought it in court. And the Supreme Court judge actually sided with the residents, saying the park board was not allowed to evict these people because they weren't actually guaranteeing that there was safe housing for them to go to. So the judge sided with the residents. The residents were thrilled that they could stay there. And recently, the provincial government, the federal government gave $700,000 to actually help maintain this Crab Park encampment. And that was quite controversial because critics were saying, look, you're putting more money into this. You're adding washrooms, you're having park rangers come check on their safety. Isn't that going to attract more people to come to this encampment? And is it going to entrench this tent city? So that is a concern because we do have the warmer weather coming. This could attract more people to live here at Crab Park. And so the issue of tents in Vancouver's public parks, also a very contentious one. just another angle of this housing crisis that we're grappling with, not just here in BC, but across the country.
Oh yeah, housing we know has been. I mean, it's one of the top of maybe I would say maybe top three things that we talk about right across the country, along with healthcare, of course. But just when you brought up the issue with regards to the tents that are set up in the park, the judge siding with those residents, saying that certainly they have the right to do this. It does speak volumes as well to when we ask the question, so what is being done? What is the affordable housing solution for these people if they're not even willing to go into those so-called structures because they themselves are so dirty and so unsafe? So Mi-Jeong, where are things going to go from here? Is there pressure or more pressure that's being put on the government to say we have to have a proper solution here?
Yeah, the Premier David Eby himself has said, I want to phase out SROs. The conditions are deplorable, and he doesn't think people should live in them. But what alternatives do we have? I mean, we have working people who are middle class who can't find places to live, let alone people who are more marginalized and vulnerable, who definitely cannot afford the kind of rents that are that we see in Metro Vancouver. So yes, more units are being built, but it is a slow process, and it takes all levels of government. We're hearing, from the city level in terms of approving development permits and funding from the province and the federal government to build these units. I mean, it's a slow fix that we're seeing, that we've been struggling with this issue for years now. We saw it intensify during the pandemic. So unless, and even the city acknowledged, we don't want to entrench tent cities. We don't want to have permanent encampments in public parks. But in the meantime, they are supporting them with washrooms and park rangers and cleaning up when they can so that they don't create fire hazards. So they don't want them entrenched, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like the units are being built fast enough to house people who are currently living in tents.
Yeah, and I think, as you point out, this is going to be an ongoing issue until we see a real concrete solution for people, and that all comes into factoring in cost of living, getting proper affordable housing and maintaining that, as we're seeing so many people still without jobs. And as you mentioned, there are even people with jobs still having difficulty making things end meet. We're going to keep following on this story, as I know, of course, you in Vancouver are going to as well. Mi-Jeong, great to have you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Mi-Jeong Lee is the anchor of CTV News at 6 in Vancouver.
Thanks for having me, Angie.
You're welcome. All right.